Hey, stop right there. I want you to listen to what I'm getting ready to tell you. You might be one that fast forwards through the introduction. Maybe you have it on double or triple time. I need you to slow it down and listen to me for 1 second before we jump into this topic. Because we're talking about homeschooling, we're talking about schooling in general. And I want you to hear my heart in this. Liz and I are giving our thoughts and our opinions in this, and we are not trying to paint anybody into a corner. We felt impressed to make a podcast on the topic of homeschooling, why we do it, why we believe it's a good thing. But ultimately, the most important thing is that you are in control of your child's education. You know what's going on with them, and you hear God for yourself and your situation. We are for you. God is for you. You have to do what's best for you and your family, and we just trust the God on the inside of you. God is on the inside of you, and He's speaking to you what you need to do. So hear our hearts today. We're for you. We give our opinions in this podcast. It's pretty strong, but man, you just have to do what God's telling you to do. We love you. Be blessed. Be encouraged. Grow in wisdom as you listen. It was about 6 weeks ago that we mentioned, we were just talking about, I think it was like developing a godly philosophy for educating your children. And so by the time we got to the end of it, we're like, we really should talk about homeschooling. And then we didn't release a podcast on homeschooling. So that's why we're doing this, is to talk specifically about homeschooling. So before anyone's like, this isn't for me because I don't want to, or I think it's worth hearing some things that we're going to share. It's really important you hear what I'm getting ready to say right now. Like, our listeners need to hear this. We have thoughts and opinions about homeschooling, and we're going to share some of those here. We are not anti people that go to school, that put their kids in public school or private school or anything like that. We're not anti that. We're for you, and every person has to do what they believe is best for their family.
That's right.
And we respect that highly. And so, but I think the conversation about homeschooling should be had because of the day and age that we're living in. And during the whole COVID season, there was a huge uptick in homeschooling, huge uptick.
Huge.
We even started a life group in our church for homeschooling, and the majority of the people are in the community. They're not even in our church.
That's right.
Because they're like, we need a place to
connect,
figure this out and connect.
That's right.
So it's a growing trend. I think it's a good growing trend, but it's a very different mindset for a lot of people if they didn't grow up in a homeschool environment, or their parents might have had a very pro, public education kind of idea. So then the idea of homeschooling just sounds like, people with long dresses and hair in a bun and don't wear makeup.
Awkward,
socially awkward. There's a bunch of stereotypes you could associate with it. But none of that is a reality. I'm sorry, some of that is still a reality for some, but that's not a reality for everybody.
That's right.
And the goal and here's the thing I think that we should preface this or start this with. And again, we are very full. Like we have partners of this ministry that they send their kids to school, and that's what they feel like. And they're the friends of ours, several different families, and in our church too. And they feel like that is the best thing for their family. And we say, hats off to you, and you do what is best for you and your family, and we support you in that.
That's right.
100%. But I think that it boils down to, are you training your kids up right? Are they getting what they need at home? Mm-hmm. Number one. And then whether they're public school or homeschool, are they getting what they need at home from you and their relationship with the Lord and helping them to develop in that? And then, number two, are you involved in their education?
That's right.
Because if you're not, and you're sending your kids to a public school, you cannot afford to do that in the day that we're living in. I don't think it's been a lot of years since I think it was safe to just send your kids to school and be like, they're getting a good education. They're not getting indoctrinated with garbage,
right,
with leftist ideologies and anti-God philosophies. There was a time in America where that wasn't in question. You should question everything your kids have coming to them in the public school system. And it's not because the teachers are bad. We know many teachers that are good, God-fearing teachers, and we thank God that they're there to be a light in a potentially dark place. But you have to have a very open reality, an eyes open reality about what's happening with your kids as far as their education.
That's right. And I think more importantly also is that you should have good communication with your children, that there needs to be open dialogue where they feel like that they can come and talk to you. And not only do they feel like that they can come and talk to you, that you're pre-having conversations with them about hard topics, because you have to remember, especially just in our day and age in general, they're hearing and seeing and knowing things from their peers, from TV, from YouTubers that, when we were in school, we weren't hearing and seeing and knowing because we didn't have it at our fingertips all the time.
Right.
And so I preface, and this is it's not if you have homeschoolers or kids in school, it's in general, do you have good communication with your children? Are you leading conversations? Are you okay with going first and talking to them about tough things, about life things? And then I'll also say too, especially, make sure there's conversation around our Constitution and our rights, and make sure your kids know how to at least read cursive handwriting, because I believe that cursive is not really in normal school anymore, and it's coming out of our society in general. And that is what all of our founding documents are written in, is cursive. And if you take the ability to be able to, maybe they don't know how to write cursive, but they need to at least know what the cursive letters are and how to read it, because then, you're giving them an ability to be able to read old documents for themselves. And then I think too, one of the biggest things about education is that you're teaching your children, or that they're being taught, that they can ask questions, that they can self-teach, that they have the ability to learn, and that they have the ability to access information and grow. And that is a continual process that should never change as you continually grow.
So there's all good stuff. And we want to hit a few things here concerning homeschooling. And this could look a little bit like homeschooling versus public school, but we're going to give you our opinion about this. And there's not a lot of things that we say we're giving you our opinion, but it is just that, it's our opinion. Mm-hmm. Because there is no Bible verse that says thou shalt homeschool thy kids. There is no verse that says not. People act holier than thou often when they do homeschool their kids and treat all the public school kids like there's some kind of plague or something. And that's stupid. I mean, I know plenty of families, do know plenty of families, they send their kids to public schools and they have great families. Mm-hmm. They do great. They have a great environment in their home. Their kids love the Lord. Everything is in order. And so it's what the Lord is speaking to you. I cannot emphasize that enough.
That's right.
With that being said, when we got married, I was very anti public school for mostly wrong reasons, mostly because I didn't get treated well and I was socially so backward that I'm like, I'll never send my kids there. So I made a vow that was partly based off of pain, which is no reason to make a vow. But there also are some legitimate reasons why I think that sending your kids to public school is not always the best option. Again, everybody's situation is different. You have a single mom, single dad who has to work. Sometimes that's their only option. They may not have money for a private school. Mm-hmm. That's their option. Well, then they have to just believe God with where they're at. If they want to change, I believe God can help you make that change and transition, even in your situation. He can help you do that. But that might be where you're at. And man, we're believing God with you. We're for you. All that. So I can't stress that enough, because Homeschool questions need answered. Understanding about homeschooling and why people would do it need to be answered. But there needs to be a wall broken down where people don't feel like they're being judged if they don't do it.
Right.
And we want to avoid that at all costs.
And both ways, like being judged for homeschooling and being judged for sending your kids to a school. Yeah. There needs to be no judgment.
It's between you and the Lord.
That's right.
It is. It's just between you and the Lord, but it's also taking into account things and because the Lord cares about your opinion. And so I had a very strong and do have a very strong opinion about homeschooling versus public education. And it's only continuing to grow stronger that I'm almost anti-public education. And it's not because of the teachers. Again, I think there's wonderful teachers. It's not because some of the things, probably the majority of what they would learn is good. You know, they can learn music, they can learn math, science, history, English. And in a lot of cases, they might learn it better. But here's some of the problems with the public school system and why we think homeschooling is a great idea. But it's a commitment. I mean, it is a commitment. It's maybe not as big of a commitment as people think because you don't have to sit for 6 hours and teach your kids all day long. You do not have to do that. Your kids can be well-educated, well-rounded, well-versed in life and ready to go into either college, a vocational school, you know, like a tech school.
Be entrepreneurs.
They get anything that they want to do. Homeschooling can train them for
That's
that.
Right.
The biggest thing is train up a child in the way they should go, the way God's designed them to go. They're bent in life. If you have a very high-minded child, you know, you have to figure out how to train them and take them through the proper courses to get them to a place to where they go into the right kind of college. Think about sending them to a place like ORU or Liberty University, a place that's Christian based, because there's so many of them that are so full of liberal nonsense. But you have to train your child according to that. If you have ones like we have, some of our kids are very ministry minded. Our oldest one's very ministry minded. He's being trained and groomed for that. We can see that. And he's doing some other things. And that's how we felt impressed to train him. If you put your kids in a public school system, it is harder to do that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's harder to do that because they're being fit into a mold and oftentimes even pressured into taking classes and doing things. And it depends on the school system. Some school systems may not be like that. The one that I grew up in, and I can only go off of my experience, I mean, they were pressuring me basically to do things, to take classes that I knew were never going to benefit me. I would have had to pay for them, and B, I struggled in those classes anyways. There was no reason for me to go take college biology. I barely made it through regular biology. There was no purpose. And they weren't evil in trying to get me to do that, but they didn't understand that I had a bent to me. And there's no way that a guidance counselor who's in charge of, 400 students, 500 students, 1,000 students can have a true understanding of what each individual child, each individual kid, teenager, whoever, what direction they're supposed to go in their life. It's impossible for them to know that. That's why it comes back to the parents being responsible for their children's education.
That's right.
They are ultimately responsible, not the government, not the state, not the public school guidance counselor or your teachers. It's fine for them to teach and give your kids things that will help them. That's great. But make sure that you're in charge. Well, when you're in a public school, it's hard. It's hard to not get squeezed into a mold versus putting your kids into a mold that they belong to. Again, I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just more challenging. Another reason why we think homeschooling is a great thing is that kids nowadays are being more than just being educated. And I wouldn't go so far as to say there's no education, it's all indoctrination. Now, with a lot of universities, that is the truth. That is a legit thing. Their classes are about indoctrinating with leftist ideology, anti-God philosophy. And so we have to be careful there. With regular like K through 12, that would be too strong of a statement. There's plenty of good education going on. But you also have to be careful because there is indoctrination that's happening in the public school systems and even in small communities. A lot of times people think, it's only happening in bigger cities. It's more prevalent there, but it's happening in small communities too. Mm-hmm. You need to know if you're sending your kids to public school, you need to know what they're taking, what classes, what's being taught in their classes. You need to know the background of the teachers. You need to dig and find out what's being taught to your child. Because if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are a God-fearing person. You need to realize that there are people that are in public schools, both good and bad, that love God, fear God, and there are ones that have no fear of God and want to indoctrinate your children with, the alphabet people, the LGBTQ, RSTU, all those people that believe all that stuff and have an agenda. They want to push that down your throat. And I could go through a list of other things that they're pushing. The critical race theory, it is being pushed, it's being taught at local levels from people that either don't know better or do know better and just are hell-bent on indoctrinating children. You need to realize that stuff is going on. When you homeschool your kids, you don't have, that fight is not even there. It's not even there. Now, it is in the sense that if they're exposed to the world around us, which everybody's exposed on some level, basically.
That's right.
If you're listening to this, you have technology, then in your home, probably in your life, your kids are exposed. Like it's there. So you just walk them through that. But when you bring the education back to the home, then you don't have that. You don't have that fight. So there's a couple of things there. Also, when you look at bad company corrupts good morals. Now, there are I've met some people that have small, very tight-knit communities where their public schools operate almost like a private school. Not that all private schools are great, because I was involved in multiple private schools when I was growing up, and they were not all fantastic. I'll just leave it there. I don't know who's listening nowadays, but man, I had some really rotten stuff that was done to me in private schools. So private schools are not always the answer either. But the influence that can be there in public schools can be very bad, and the scripture is very clear. Evil communications or bad company corrupts good morals. If you have good morals put into your children and you want them to be raised and stick with those good morals, love God, treat people right, praying, reading the Bible, not living in vulgarity, and not cussing and drinking, not dipping and cussing and chewing and going with those that do, right? If you want to keep your kids away from that, putting them in public school is going to most likely is going to enter you into the potential of them being exposed to things that you didn't want them to be exposed to. Mm-hmm. So that again is another reason why we are pro homeschool and we think it's good. But again, we don't want this to be like a Republican Democrat thing. Okay. It's not, we're pro this and you're pro that. There's a separation. We're just giving you our thoughts, mostly me at this point. When we got married, there were several things I was like, I will be in ministry. We will not own a cat. And I know, crazy.
That's tragic.
We will not own a cat. We still don't own a cat to this day, and all my boys side with me. We will not own a cat.
Not all of them,
and
actually.
We will homeschool our kids. And I went about that so backwards.
You did, and I would say that first.
But I think I was right in my stance.
I believe for you were right in your stance. That you had understanding, but like you said, you had made a vow. And I think it's very interesting because I hadn't really thought about the fact that you said, so I don't want to get off like you made a vow that because you didn't want to experience pain. I also made a vow, but to me it was education so that, there were choices so that you could have a choice to make money, to be a provider, all that thing, so you wouldn't ever have to be stuck anywhere. Yeah. And so my vow and your vow clashed, and it makes sense now because a little bit we had some clashing in our views, but now we're on the same page, and we're not.
I didn't have to restrain you to be on my page.
Right.
You've seen the light.
I have seen the light, but I've come to a greater understanding, and I would say probably number one takeaway is you can't do anything based out of fear.
You should not. That's right.
Because when you are in fear, what happens is that you're making decisions based on that fear, or not making decisions based on fear. If I put my kids here, then this, or if I put my kids here, then this, and I'm scared and I'm afraid. And here's the problem that you run into, one of the biggest problems, whether homeschooled or public schooled or private schooled, is that if you're in fear, oftentimes you try to control and manipulate your children, the situation, whatever. And then that's when you have rebellion really rise up out of your children, is when you're trying to be controlling because of a pain. Most of the time it's not out of, it's out of fear.
Yeah.
of them not wanting them to experience things that you experience, but you're not good at communicating that, or you haven't even identified, well, actually, I'm scared and I don't want you to experience the same things that I experience, so I'm going to control this. And then another thing that I think is super important that you have to identify for you as a family unit is, what system do you want your children to be in? And it is a system, whatever it is, whether homeschooling, whether public schooling, whether private schooling, whatever tutoring, however that looks for you. It is a system that they are entered into. And so most of the time, whatever that system is, especially a public school system, there isn't a bending to that system. It is a system that has particular ways and strategies to get an outcome.
That's exactly right.
So hold on. You go into
you're just preaching my language here.
Yeah, a public school, and the system is you start at kindergarten, you graduate at 12th grade. And that's the way it goes. And so
what you're taught in there is very systematic.
It is.
And it's not all bad.
It's not all bad, but
much of it is very good.
But it is a system. You get to this point, and now you are out of kindergarten, and this is the point of first grade, and this is the point of third grade, and then they had to start the program of No Child Left Behind, and you have kids who
and a lot of that is based on government funding.
Right.
They're like, we have to get kids through. If kids aren't getting through, then local school districts, they lose out on government funding. And so now your kids are being educated based on money and not based on what they need.
That's right. And
not
that
a good situation.
And then that's when probably parents a lot of times
that doesn't mean that the teachers have that heart.
No.
It's just, it's a big, monstrous system that is very imperfect.
And we have asked teachers in a public school system to take on 30 kids who are not
for little pay,
their own children,
right?
And who cannot discipline, and who most of the children
now they can't even
have no
talk
fear.
stern to them.
That's right.
It's
There's
crazy.
no fear, and so now you have children who are manipulating and controlling the adult.
Yeah.
Because there's no reverence or respect, and if heaven help you use that language that you should respect which goes back to some moral standards that weren't taught at home or whatever, and you're asking one individual who, I don't want to say they don't care, because they wouldn't have become a teacher if they didn't care for kids.
Sure.
So they do care, but not the same as a mom and dad
care.
Impossible.
It's impossible.
I shouldn't say not as much, because some parents, because of their own brokenness, can't care for their children the way that they should care for their children, because they're dealing with their own pains and insecurities and fears and whatever. So it goes back to like, is the expectation, and are you taking, and I believe I probably said this before, are you taking responsibility? Are you taking ownership for the children that you decided to have?
That is where it comes down to.
And then are you training them how they need to be trained?
Okay, so here's the deal. You hit the nail on the head. And it's all about your child going down the path that God has chosen for them. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they're going to be responsible for that one day, not you. But you are responsible during their formative years to pour into them and to shield them and protect them. You, parent, are responsible for that, not anybody else. And again, the Lord might say to you, you need to send your kid to the public school. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would never say that God would never tell anybody to do that. But if he is telling you, he's going to give you the grace to do it. He's going to give you the wisdom to do it.
That's right.
But he's also going to give you an extreme amount of caution as well, because there's a lot to be concerned with it. But let's take this for example. Let's pretend that you and I grew up in the same home. Of course, we wouldn't have been married, but let's just pretend for a second that we're brother and sister. You and I are very...
That's weird.
Okay, I know, but it's an example, okay? So let's just pretend that you and I are brother and sister. We grew up in the same home. And the responsibility of our parents for you versus me would have been drastically different.
Drastically.
I'm good working with my hands. I don't have a high intellect, but I am wired for particular intellectual things, but not most things. I have had a passion for just the Lord and for ministry since I was 7 years old. Those are the kind of things that my parents needed to see in me and help develop in me. Now, if you grew up in the same home that I did, then, and let's just say we had totally different parents, right? Or just a total abstract scenario here. But we're the same people. You have a much more intelligent way of thinking. You're very book smart. You grab a hold of things very easily, and you're very mercy driven. There's lots of things about you that if we both were in the same home and we had the same set of parents, they should have looked at Kent and said, he does not need to learn calculus. He doesn't need to learn these things. They could have looked at you, and as they would begin to develop and understand, understand desire in you, they could see it would be good. She has a desire for nursing. She should learn all of the science and all of that kind of stuff. And she loves learning about that anyway. Kent hates learning about it. Let's stop trying to force him to do it. And let's help him find out what path the Lord has put him on and make him go that way. That's how that's supposed to look. And every child is unique. That's why we love homeschooling so much, because we don't force our kids we have to force them to do something. Like none of them wanted to learn to read when they were little. You got to force your kid to learn to read. You have to do it. You have to do it. You're going to hurt them if you don't teach them to read and write and spell and do some basic math. However, those are basic things. Those are building blocks. Just because your kid learns math doesn't mean he's going to be a mathematician. Right? So there's a stopping point with a lot of things, and then they're going to get into other things that they're more interested in. I should have realistically, and I'm not coming down on my parents or anything, but realistically looking back, by the time I was 15 or 16 years old, I should not have been in high school anymore. I should have been out of high school. I should have been developing skills that I loved. I should have been studying underneath of other ministers. I should have been doing things like that to help develop what God was putting in me, because I had to learn all the math and science and English and all of that I was going to learn. My last 2 years of school, with the exception of I was able to do a lot of music stuff, which was good. With the exception of that, they were a waste for me, a total waste.
Right.
And so those are just things to think about and consider when you're looking at, why would I homeschool my kid? Why would I not homeschool my kid? We're pro homeschooling, but it's not because we've got our nose in the air and we think that we're doing everything perfect. It's what God has spoken to us. And one more thing I'll say about it too is that because of the way that you thought and you were raised when it came to homeschooling, you really struggled with it.
Yeah.
And I didn't help you through that. So that's another story for another time, but you really struggled with it. And it was because of how you just thought about schooling, and like your view was, you got to put your kids in, they got 6-7 hours. It was, you were taking the public school system and trying to apply it to homeschooling. And it's like, no, that's the purpose of homeschooling. You don't have to use the same system.
That's right.
And you're going to educate your kids. If you do it right, you'll educate them actually better.
Right.
They'll
so
be
it's
more
kind of like
well-rounded.
an unschooling model.
Yes.
It's getting rid of these boundaries that a particular system has created, and then going the way that your children need to go, so that they won't depart. And then they, one beautiful thing about homeschooling, and you can hear this even from college systems, like when they have kids who go from homeschooling into college, that is a huge thing. There are people that can help integrate and do that, if that's so what you choose to do. But they love taking homeschoolers because they can self-teach and they're motivated, and they know how to choose things that are going to apply to what they want in the future.
Sure.
Which is very important, is that, do our kids know what it is that they want, and then how to take those things and do application so that they can achieve the outcome, instead of just choosing, I need this, 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 and this, because this is what the system says that I need, instead of making the system work for them, they work for the system.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah, and I want to say we need to finish. We're way over time, but there's so much to talk about with this that it's almost unfair to do a quick podcast and not really hit some things. And there's way more we could hit. We just don't have enough time. But this is a whistle wetter just to kind of maybe cause people to think a little bit different about it, expand their thinking on it. But one of the things I said is that, I forget exactly how I said, and then you kind of cut me off because you had something to say, which is basically what we do in conversation is we get as much as we can in before the other person starts talking. I said something about you'll train or teach or educate your kids better. And I want to be careful that I'm not saying that your kid's not going to be educated well, again, if they're in a public school system or a private school system. But it just ultimately comes down to you are the one that has to be in control over your child's education. If you're not and they're doing homeschool, they're probably not getting educated at all. And they're not gonna get what they need. If you're not in control and they're in a public school system, they're probably gonna get a decent base level education, unless they're a natural self teacher and take and just soak it in if they're that child, which are further and few between. But if they're in a public school system and you're not in control and really know the details of what's going on, you're feeding your kids to the wolves. I hate to say it like that, but it is the truth. There's an unbelievable amount of nonsense that goes on between the other kids that are there, between teachers that are into indoctrinating their, I'll just call it their liberal, leftist, godless philosophy. They're interested in indoctrinating your kids with that. There are principals that love God and fear God. There are principals that don't care anything about God at all and just want to push a political agenda. You have to realize they are there. And you say, well, not in our town. Well, where did those teachers come from? Some of them came from the town you live in, maybe the area you live in, and you know them and they're God-fearing. But some of them, they get hired because they're looking for a particular teacher with that skill set. And they came out of some liberal university where they got indoctrinated with garbage. And now they're in your school system teaching your kids complete nonsense. Maybe that's not the text, but it's what's happening around the text that's being taught. Mm-hmm. We have to know what's going on with our kids. We have to know it. So consider homeschool as an option. Don't feel bound to it. You shouldn't feel bound to anything except obeying God's voice. As simple as that. We need to finish. We're done right here. Let me say this one last thing. No matter what you do, we love you and we support you. We just wanted to give our thoughts, our opinions on this. People ask us. They wonder how we do things, why we do things. These are our thoughts, and again, they're our opinions. I'm not going to give you a verse that says you have to do it this way. There is no verse. I think one of the biggest shames that a lot of Christians do is they build a doctrine around personal opinion. Mm-hmm. And because they feel strong about it, they want to force everybody else into you have to do it this way. That's not Liz and I's heart at all. We're not trying to force anybody into anything. We just want you to have perspective that we have. Maybe it will minister to you, help you see some things maybe you're not seeing. But we love you and we appreciate you. We're for you. We're praying for you. Hallelujah.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. Share with your friends and on your socials. For more information about Ward Ministries, check out wardmen.org. If this podcast is encouraging you on your marriage and family, we want to hear about it. Email us at info@wardmen.org, and make sure you keep your eye out weekly for the latest podcast on marriage and family.